Welcome to a tutorial video on Twine 2.0. In this video I'm going to cover using JavaScript in the Snowman story format. So if you're not familiar, Twine 2.0 has a number of different story formats. Each one handles JavaScript, HTML, and CSS in slightly different ways. So to start, let's change the story format. So from the menu, we can edit JavaScript, edit the style sheet, and then of course change a story format. So, as of this recording, by default, Twine 2.0 uses the Harlow story format, this first one listed here. However, this video is going to cover using the Snowman story format. And it handles JavaScript and HTML in a little bit different way. So I've already selected Snowman, so I'm going to close this window and bring up the start passage. So as you can see, it looks a lot different than what we've come to expect from TwineScript and what we normally think of as Twine 2.0. We normally think of it in terms of the Harlow story format, which uses TwineScript. The Snowman story format, however, does not use TwineScript at all. This assignment macro will not be run within the Snowman story format. It only works within Harlow. However, we can use JavaScript using these tags, sort of like a script tag. It starts with a less than sign, then a percent symbol, and then we close it with a percent symbol and a greater than sign. And everything run within this tag will be executed as JavaScript. So we can actually define a function here, returns true, that returns true. We can get the result of calling the function that returns true, and then we can check it. We can also call JavaScript's print function. The print function in JavaScript runs inline. That is, when it is called, it will push text to the HTML document at whatever point it's executing at. So in order, this print statement will be run, and then everything else will be rendered. So as I said before, TwineScript only runs in Harlow. It doesn't work in Snowman. So you can't use TwineScript, unfortunately. You can't use assignment or changer or sensor macros. They just don't work in Snowman. However, we can use HTML, like we can use in Harlow, just including the tags we want. And of course, we can use the normal double brackets to create a link to another passage. However, each passage is its own function scope. That is, we can't call functions defined in another passage, because that passage has its own function scope that it ran in, its own way of running, and then in another passage we have a totally different function scope. Those functions don't exist on the same level and they can't directly talk to each other. However, we can call things that exist outside of any one passage scope. Things like the document object or document body or the window in JavaScript all exist at the highest level of function scope. They're accessible by anything within any one document. So, for example, we can call document.getElements by tag name, ask for a tag name, get the first result, because elements return, any get elements functions in JavaScript return an array. They're the first result, and then we can use it to set some new text. So what does this look like in practice? Well, it looks like this. See, the first thing is run was again the print function that ran in line, so it printed, and then everything else was rendered after that. And then again is that TwineScript only works in Harlow, doesn't work in Snowman, and we can mix in HTML. Notice this is now strong, it's bolded. And we have a link to another passage. We also have C JavaScript, which I'll cover in just a moment. So I'm going to click on another passage and some new text. The JavaScript was run in another passage, and the text of the div element which was found using the getElementsByTagName function of the document object, was then changed to some new text. So that element was actually introduced in the Edit Story JavaScript window. I changed the JavaScript that ran when the story started. And it looks like this. However, JavaScript functions and objects defined within this, the Edit Story JavaScript window, exist in another different function scope. So functions and objects defined here cannot be called by any passages because they each exist, again, in a different function scope and can't directly talk to each other. So while you can't call functions defined here from any passage, you can, however, call anything that exists at a higher function scope. So, as I mentioned before, the document object, for example, exists at a higher function scope than any one passage, or as the story starts, exists at the highest level, along with window and a couple other things. So I can define a function, however, I can use JavaScript still within the Snowman story function. I can add an element. Right here I have a function addElement, creates an element twtext. I can set its inner HTML to C JavaScript, and I can append it to the body within the document and then call that function to run. But as you might have noticed, it got added down here. So when stories run in Snowman, the JavaScript that was introduced in the Edit Story JavaScript window got run after the first passage in Snowman got run, because it was appended to the body of the document, and as the last thing here, we see it was appended last. So the passage ran first and then it was appended. Not a big deal, but something to keep to remember is if you're appending anything, at least in Snowman, it will get run after the first passage. So again, as kind of a review here, if you're using the Snowman story format, you can use this tag here, less than in parentheses and percent and greater than sign, and include any JavaScript you want. You can define functions, you can get results, you can test for various things. And then if you want to include some text from the running JavaScript in the document, you can use the print function. And then again, Twine script is only actually in Harlow. It doesn't exist in Snowman, but we can use HTML if we want. And each passage has its own function scope. You can't call a function defined in one passage in another, unfortunately. But you can call things that exist in a higher scope, things like the document, things like the window, to do things. And of course, if you want JavaScript to run as a story starts, you can define it within the Edit Story JavaScript window. And so there you have it, kind of a review of how to use JavaScript in the Snowman story format. Thanks for watching.